My name is Kenji Yoshino, and I'm a faculty member here and the director of the center. I'd like to start by thanking the sponsors of our speaker series for their support. Those firms are Cleary Gottlieb, Cravath, Swaine & Moore, Davis Polk, DLA Piper, Fried Frank, Kirkland & Ellis, Latham & Watkins, Paul Weiss, Sullivan & Cromwell, Wachtell Lipton, Weil Gotshal & Manges, and White & Case. After the main event with our distinguished guest, whom I will introduce in a moment, there'll be a reception sponsored by DLA Piper, which we hope you'll attend. I'd now like to introduce our guest. I'm thrilled to welcome Professor Dolly Chugh. Professor Chugh is an award-winning professor at the NYU Stern School of Business, where she teaches courses in leadership and management. Her first book, The Person You Mean to Be: How Good People Fight Bias, which is the subject of today's event, has received rave reviews and been featured on the Today Show, in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, NPR, and many other media outlets. We've purchased a copy of that book for everyone in the room. Professor Chugh's TED Talk was named one of the 25 most popular TED Talks of 2018 and currently has almost 4 million views. Professor Chugh attended Cornell University, where she majored in psychology and economics, and then completed her MBA and PhD at Harvard University. We're extremely lucky to have her here with us today. I'd also like to introduce David Glasgow, the center's inimitable executive director and an adjunct professor here at the law school. David will be speaking with Professor Chugh for this event. Before I turn it over to David and Professor Chugh, I'd like to mention the process for audience Q&A. Instead of taking audience questions via microphone, we're going to do it via index card. You will have picked up an index card on your way into the room. Please write questions onto your card as they come to mind during the discussion. Helpers will walk through the room to collect the cards, and David will read out a selection from the pile when we get to the Q&A. With that, please join me in welcoming Professor Chugh.
So thank you so much for being here. Actually, I realize we probably both need an
Yes. I'm on.
Can everyone hear me now? Okay. So to help frame the conversation, I feel like there's some feedback, right? To help frame the conversation, I wanted to home in on the subtitle of your book, which is about how good people fight bias. So can you, sorry, is there audio? Is it working now, or is working on it? Okay. I'm sorry about this, everyone. I'll just keep talking until we figure out that it's actually working again. Okay, better? Great. So the subtitle of your book is How Good People Fight Bias.
Yeah.
And so I was just hoping you could help us unpack what you mean by good people and what sort of bias they're fighting.
I love it. You're the first person to ever ask about the subtitle. That's so cool.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. The subtitle is actually my way of knowing when a friend says they love my book, which all good friends should say whether they've read your book or not. My way of knowing if they've really read the book, because it's a little bit of a trick wording. I think we should stop trying to be good people. That's my campaign. I actually think us caring so much about being good people is making it difficult for us to be better people. That's basically the thesis of the book. And so how good people fight bias is a little bit of the way good people fight bias is they stop putting themselves in a really tight corner of being a quote-unquote good person, where for many of us, what that means is I am free of bias and mistakes. Now, I'm all in favor of being free of bias and mistakes, but as a social psychologist, the research suggests that none of us are free of bias and mistakes. But almost all of us care deeply about being seen as and feeling like a good person. And I know right now you just thought of a few examples. You're like, maybe not everyone. But actually, the funny thing is, while our definitions of what a good person is may vary from person to person, it is actually true that even white nationalists see themselves as good people. Like, all of us, close to all of us, see ourselves as a good person. We care about that identity. It's called our moral identity. It is something we value, whatever definition we have for what a good person is. And if your definition of good person is free of bias and mistakes, you're doomed. Because the research is really clear that none of us are free of bias and mistakes. So when our biases or mistakes are made noticeable to us, if we care deeply about that identity, and it's inevitable that we will have some biases and mistakes, what I do is go red zone defensive. Well, that obviously wasn't true. What you think I just said something offensive, but I think you're just a little sensitive. And we find all sorts of ways mentally to explain away whatever the bias or mistake was rather than learn from it. So my campaign is let's let go of that tight corner we've put ourselves in where there's no room to grow and create a more expansive way of thinking about ourselves as goodish people. And by goodish, I want to be clear, I'm not saying let's set lower standards for ourselves than good. I'm actually saying let's set higher standards, a higher standard where we're always learning, we're always growing. We're doing what we do in a lot of parts of our life. Like you get a new phone, you like figure it out, you get better, you mess it up. You're like, oh wait, no, that's not what I meant to do. You start over, you ask young people, right? you look it up, you Google it, you learn. And eventually you get better at it, right?
Right.
And what if we thought of ourselves, let's say in relation to bias, the same way, is always getting better, turning to others for help, in educating ourselves. That's what I mean by goodish. And so how good people fight bias is they stop trying to be good people and engage in the process of learning continuously.
Great. And so you mentioned that all of us are going to make mistakes on these topics at some point. So can you talk about some of the more common mistakes that people make when they are sort of well-meaning, they want to be a good ally, they want to fight bias, but nonetheless, what are some of the common forms of mistake?
Well, that's easy because they say all research is me search, so all I have to do is tell you about all my mistakes because they're voluminous. So I think one of the things we struggle with in our attempts to be allies is this commitment to seeing ourselves as being on the right side of history or on the right side of an issue and potentially missing ways in which we might be contributing to the very issue that we're worried about. So, I'm a professor. I care a lot about people having access to education. And yet I also participate in recruiting processes for undergrads, for MBAs, for PhDs, and for faculty that are really limited in what institutions we are looking at. And so if it's true that I believe there's bias, systemic bias baked into our entire society, why would I only focus on certain institutions? Isn't that just contributing and perpetuating the very problem what I just said to you was hard to say. I feel really uncomfortable right now. But it's the reality of I can't sit idly and claim to be an ally and not be willing to confront the ways in which I'm not. It's one really distinct way of, and if I'm willing to, if I do that as a good person, I simply won't confront this piece. If I'm a goodish person, I can start to nibble away at it.
And so your book talks about 4 kind of quote unquote good intentions that people sometimes bring
Yeah.
as allies. So you talk about savior mode, sympathy mode,
Yeah.
difference blindness,
Yes.
and typecasting mode.
Yes.
So could you kind of unpack those concepts
It's been
a
a
little
while
bit
since
for
I read
us?
the book, David. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so savior mode. So I have a student, or I had a student, he's graduated, but I had a student who I was mentoring pretty closely, first generation college student. And I'd like to think I sort of contributed to his journey through NYU. And, intervened in some really key points where he might have left school for a variety of reasons and was invited to be one of his 2 guests at graduation. So, I'm proud of that. What I'm not proud of is that I once found out accidentally that he was sleeping in the library. Like, not power napping, like that's where he was living. It was in Bope's library. And my first thought was not how, what does he need? Or what made it difficult for him to tell me that. My first thought was, how dare he not let me help him? How dare he not let me save the day? That's the savior mode. That addiction to wanting to be the source of the solution, to wanting to have that warm glow that comes with helping someone. So again, this is like a buzzkill. I don't want you to be a good person. I don't want you to help people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the savior mode when we're trying to be an ally is dangerous when it becomes the fuel. And I noticed in that moment that I felt myself falling into exactly that. Mm-hmm. What were the other 3?
So sympathy mode was the next one.
Okay. Sympathy mode is dangerous when we feel sorry for something or someone. It's creating a power structure that we feel so bad for them, but we are in some ways elevating ourselves above them. And so it prevents us from really learning and partnering and seeing what others have to offer. So for example, I think one of the stories in the book about that is about a group that was working with residents of a housing project to sort of help them. But when asked questions like, tell me more about the people you're working with, tell me about their lives, it was just a drop-off of baskets of supplies. It was sort of a sympathy-based move as opposed to an empathy or a partnership-based move. And as an ally, that creates a situation where we're diminishing others and elevating ourselves. Also guilty of that one. Mm-hmm. Difference blindness.
Yeah.
You want to go there next? Difference blindness or color blindness might be the one we're often hearing about and talking about, is the idea that we're not allowing ourselves to see the fullness of someone. So what studies show is that if I am talking to a black person, maybe a better example is I'm trying to tell you who to go talk to on the other side of the room, and I'm like, oh, the person with the blue shirt. This is a law school. There's a lot of blue shirts. The man, again, a lot of men. And I'm not just saying the black man with the blue shirt, that in that moment, I will be less trusted by a person of color who hears me say that, because my lack of willingness to notice race when it is relevant, very important, when it is relevant in describing someone that I'm trying to find, signals to the other person that I'm not seeing them fully. And so color blindness or difference blindness of any sort is one in which we are sort of tolerating or ignoring a difference as if there was a reason to tolerate or ignore it. Like, why wouldn't I see race when it was relevant, as opposed to the real problem, which is seeing race when it isn't relevant or using race when it isn't relevant. So color blindness is, some people say, well, didn't Dr. Martin Luther King say that we wouldn't see the color of people's skin. But he meant not use it when it's not relevant in the decision. He didn't mean ignore someone's full humanity and something that is central to many people's identity, whatever that difference, what may be different to you, not different to them, what that piece of the identity is.
And then the final was typecasting.
Typecasting. Yeah, so typecasting is the idea, I mean, sort of like the model minority is sometimes an example of this, where East Asians or South Asians are sometimes described as the model minority, and that will be a compliment, intended as a compliment, but not always received that way. I'm the child of Indian immigrants, and I will say that within our own community, we do perpetuate this on our own, but the reason it isn't always received as a positive is it puts people in a pretty narrow, circle of who they can be and what they can be. So model minority conveys certain things that you're good at, but also certain things that you're not. So you're not necessarily being viewed as a leader. You're not necessarily being viewed as an athlete. You're not necessarily being viewed as assertive. So typecasting, even when positive, is again sort of missing the opportunity to see the full humanity that someone has to offer. So these are sort of grounded in the psychology and the research underneath it, 4 things that research shows that it makes it difficult to have the impact we're trying to have, to be the people we mean to be as allies, and in the eyes of those we're trying to support.
Great. So we've talked about, why we shouldn't be good people, I guess,
Yep.
and also some of the terrible things we're all doing when we try to be good people.
Yeah.
So your book does kind of offer some suggestions for how we can improve ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And you talk a little bit about the media consumption habits that we have, for those of us who are parents, like how we raise our children, as well as how we interact in our social circles and on social media. So do you mind, we don't have to go through all 4 of them, but do you mind just talking a little bit about what we in the room can do on our own to try to improve ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. There's stuff you can do today. It actually is really accessible. So whatever it is you consume, like maybe it's podcasts, maybe it's books, maybe it's movies or music or news, or whatever you're bringing into your mental space on a regular basis, do an audit on the last 5 to 10 that you've consumed. What voices were represented? What voices were represented in the creation, in the actual voices in the thing? What perspectives were included? And if we do an audit, let's say on the last 5 to 10, you might notice patterns. You might notice patterns in sort of the similarity to your own voice or experience. You might notice patterns within the 5 to 10. I definitely noticed patterns. This was embarrassing. We're in the process of moving, and I'm a book person. That would be like my best thing to audit, would be my books. And so I decided, rather than the haphazard way, I just sort of throw books on bookshelves. In the old home, in the new home, I was going to be like a librarian and have like the biography section and different genres. And I put up the biography section, and there was maybe 30 books there. There were 2 of women. What? I mean, so you'll notice patterns, And so an easy, quick audit that you probably could be doing right now in your mind might elicit some insight into what you're breathing in, and ways in which you could just, by doing something you love, whatever it is this thing is that you consume that you love consuming, is there just a little tweak that right there could shift that a bit? If you're a parent, particularly if you still have influence over your children, meaning they're David's kids' age, not my kids' age. Oh, you don't think you do? Wait till they're teenagers. If you still have some influence over their consumption, there's also a place where you can really pivot without much effort. Obviously, in terms of reflecting on who we socialize with, who we sit next to, who we turn to for advice, not with the idea of sort of objectifying people and, I need to find a gay friend, like that's not the idea. But are there ways in which you can just expose yourself without sort of imposing on anyone else, expose yourself to more sort of social circles that aren't your natural sort of draw?
Great. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about educating or confronting other people who engage in biased behavior.
Yeah.
And I wanted to start really just by asking you, is confronting people an effective strategy for reducing bias?
Yes and no. So I learned a little rule of thumb that I found really useful with that. I learned it from someone I used to work with in a previous chapter of my life. I was a consultant. And we would work with big companies. And one of my colleagues, Susan Annunzio-Tynan, used to say to the CEOs, the CEO would be like, okay, we're rolling in this new strategy. We got to get everybody on board. And she'd say, no, we do not. And we will not be getting everybody on board. What we need to get is the 20% of people who are already on board, who are like into it and been waiting for this new strategy. Those 20% we need to get out of their way. We've been in their way for too long. No offense. There's 20% of the people, sorry, it's just an example, who are not coming with us ever, who are going to be really vocal, in fact, about what a bad idea this new strategy is. We're not going to get them, at least not with the reasonable amount of effort we're willing to expend. And then there's 60% of people who are just thinking about other things right now. Like, this is not their issue. They're not deeply engaged in this new strategy. So they're not for it, they're not against it. They're going to go whichever way the winds blow on this issue. They're going to be shaped by the culture, shaped by the norms. What we need is get out of their way, don't exhaust ourselves, and get these folks on board. And so when we're thinking about who to confront, I like using the 20-60-20 rule to make a quick, frankly, snap judgment. So you could legitimately poke holes in that, but got to live your life and do it fast. Make a snap judgment. Oh, are you dealing with 20-60 or 20? If you're dealing with 20, they want to know. Just find the right moment to do it. Like, just, I don't know if you noticed, but when you said that, I saw so-and-so cringe. I don't think it had the impact. I don't think it landed the way you intended. In grad school, someone I really didn't know other than to say hello in the halls was introducing a new PhD student, giving her first presentation to the entire psychology department at Harvard. And she was a black female grad student in her first year. And this white male introducer introduced her with a fun fact that her favorite song was Brown Sugar. You see the problem? I mean, it's a fun fact, but that's not the moment for that fun fact. There were other fun facts that would have been better in that moment. And I just couldn't hear another word of the presentation because of that moment. And I did what any reasonable ally would do afterwards. I went back to my office and vented to my office mates. Went on for hours. Until my office mate finally said, "Why don't you go tell him? Why are you telling us?" I'm like, I'm not going to tell him. I don't know him. I'm sure he doesn't want to hear from me. She's like, no, I know him. I think he would want to. So I did. Long story short, knock on his door. "Hi, I don't know if you remember me, I'm Dolly." I start the thing I got to say, thinking the door's going to slam, and instead he says, "Oh my gosh, do you have time? Let me grab another chair. Come sit down. I really want to hear more about this." That's what the 20 sounds like. They're a gift. This 20 is going to wear you out. You have an uncle who you spend holidays with who is in this group. And you're spending too much time at the holidays table going back and forth. Now, what I'm not saying is that you should allow it to go unchecked. What you need to do here is simply state, wow, I can't believe you're saying that, or you don't look old enough to be that old-fashioned, or something, but not do the back and forth. Who you're really speaking to are these folks. What you're saying to these folks is, that was not okay. I'm not going to allow that to be the norm, because I know you're paying attention to the norms. And so I'm not deeply confronting these folks. I'm simply naming that was not cool. And these are the folks that I really want to spend time with. These are the folks that you usually want to have private conversations. You want to do it using stories more than data. When people are not deeply invested in an issue, they're more persuaded by humanizing of the issue than statistics. And so this group, which we usually don't spend enough time trying to confront because they're not super vocal and invested, so they don't grab our attention.
Right. So I want to remind you, in about 10 minutes, I'm going to move to Q&A. So I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, to please start writing them on your cards, and we'll have helpers walk around and collect them from you over the next 10 minutes or so.
David, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
The individual who said pull up a chair is now one of my dearest friends. And both he and I remember that as the moment we became friends for life.
Great. Does the research give any suggestions for how to go about an effective confrontation if you want to have that confrontation? As in, we're often faced with choices. Do I say something to call them out in public in front of everyone?
Right.
Do I pull them aside privately like you did?
Right.
What's the kind of tone and tenor of the conversation? Do we have any clues about what's effective or not effective?
Well, part of it is deciding what your goal is. So what the research says, we could characterize the approach you might take as heat or light, right? This is a metaphor that many have used. And the heat approach is pushing for change and pushing hard, not looking to make the other person or system or institution comfortable. Light is pushing for education and attitude change. It's slower. It's prioritizing the comfort of the person or the system or the institution. And what the research says is that both are important. When I originally started writing the book, I'm like a light-based person, and I was sort of imagining writing a book for light-based people, like people who don't like making people uncomfortable. If you just rearrange the dishwasher rather than actually telling your spouse you don't like the way they load the dishwasher, this book is for you. But what I realized in doing the research for the book and reading the history and the scholarship on social movements is that the movements that have been most effective are the ones that have had both heat and light. Movements that have relied more heavily on heat or more heavily on light haven't been as effective as those who have both. That there is something important about pushing to change systems. You're changing behaviors more than attitudes, and pushing to change attitudes, even if it goes at a slower pace. And so I think it is useful to think about, as individuals, kind of where you sit in that heat-light. Some of us are really good at light, some of us are really good at heat, some of us are good at both, bless you if you are. But respecting the other, and the book opens with a story about me attending my first ever protest. It was a Black Lives Matter protest, and the punchline of the story was what a bad protester I was, and sort of where did that leave me in this movement. And when I shared the manuscript, when it was in draft form with a friend, interestingly, it was the same office mate who told me to go talk. It's weird, I just noticed it was the same person. When I shared it with her, she said, "No, I love the book, blah, blah, here's a couple of ideas. By the way, I think you're gonna upset the Black Lives Matter people." And I was like, wait, why? That's not what I meant to do. This was supposed to be a love letter to them because they're doing the thing I'm not good at doing. And she said, well, it's coming across like you're saying light is better than heat. Like, oh, well, protests, but go try to change people one at a time. And I was like, no, 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 no. And that's where it became really important to highlight this research that says that both are important. You as an individual may move to one or the other, but not to sabotage the other. Just because you're a light person doesn't mean you should be bad-mouthing the people who make people uncomfortable. We need them, and vice versa.
So let's turn a little bit to talk about nudging institutions, because we've talked about confronting, individual bias.
Yep.
Most of the people here today are either lawyers or law students. So if they want to make their law firms or organizations that they work in or the law school itself more kind of diverse and inclusive, what are some kind of concrete kind of strategies that they can do to try to nudge the institutions, even if they don't sit in a leadership role that would
Right.
enable them to kind of change things at a systems level?
Yep, absolutely. So one of the people I interviewed for the book, Tony Profit, is this is a really interesting job title, Chief Equality Officer at Salesforce. And in the business community, Salesforce is viewed as one of the most progressive, it's in the tech software space, and one of the most progressive companies out there in terms of pushing for gender equity and racial equity and just a variety of issues. And I interviewed him, and I was like, oh, okay, you've got this really impressive title, Chief Equality Officer, so what are you doing at Salesforce? What's the big secret? And he said, and I'm not saying this to diminish what he said, this is not all he said, but this was the first thing he said. He said, we're running better meetings. And I'm like, dude, you need a better answer. Running better meetings? Like I teach MBA students. That's like managerial skills 101, how to run a meeting, how to balance airtime, how to make sure the right people are in the room, how to ensure you have dissent, how to ensure you have full information. I mean, that's basic stuff. And he's like, no, but 80% of meetings, people rate 80% of meetings as a waste of time. And whatever's happening in your organization, in your law firm, is happening in your meetings. Whoever's being included or excluded, talked over, ideas are being credited to others, at the table, not at the table. Whatever's happening in your meetings is happening in your organization. So start there. Take all the things that actually just lead to better meetings, balance airtime, et cetera, and those things, it turns out, will also start shaping diversity and inclusion. So start with the conversation, start with the formal or informal meeting, the in-person, the virtual, the Zoom, the Skype, the email, the text, all the things that we're using that are called meetings now. So that's one place we can start. No matter where you sit in an organization, whether you're running the meeting or participating in the meeting, you can look for opportunities to amplify, to echo, to circle back to ask, I wonder if we should include, to report out to create more inclusive conversations. Mm-hmm. That's one good place to start.
Great. So my colleague Jess and I think maybe Shirley are going to start walking through the room to collect questions from you. So please start handing them to them. So in the meantime, I wanted to ask you about kind of two terms that get thrown around a lot in the public conversation about allyship and bias, which are call-out culture and cancel culture, right? And wanted to get your thoughts about, whether you think these are real, and if they are, whether they're a problem. And so for those, who are unfamiliar in the room, like my understanding at least of what's meant by call-out culture is, the culture that kind of a direct confrontation, which may risk, humiliating or upsetting the person, is worth doing and making them feel uncomfortable because, that's what effectuates change. And cancel culture, I think, seems to be more of an online phenomenon of, I guess, piling onto people who say or do something wrong on an issue of bias until they're, I guess, run out into the wilderness or boycotted or something. And so I just wanted to get your sense of whether these terms, mean anything to you. Do you think they're problematic? If so, what can be done about them? And if not, why do so many people talk about them?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's a couple ways to think about it, both in terms of like, are you the part of the army delivering the call out or the cancel? And are you the target of are you being canceled? Are you being called out? And the reality is it probably, call outs and cancels are changing the norms. And we just talked about how norms are a powerful way to change behaviors and attitudes. So there's no doubt that that trend is contributing to many of the rapidly changing societal forces we see today. So in that sense, they do work. There is a dehumanizing quality to it, and I think that's what makes a lot of us uncomfortable. And are they working because they're just sending people underground, or are they working because they're actually leading to real change? I see one more right here. I'm somewhat sympathetic, even though I don't like the idea of being canceled or called out. I'm somewhat sympathetic to the intention behind it. There is sort of the dehumanizing piece that probably we could, as with everything on the internet, we could remind ourselves that there is a human on the other side of it. Sometimes people talk about that they don't want to get canceled and they don't want to get called out, and that's their worry. And I guess my thought on that is, like, how many Instagram followers do you have? Like, are we really, unless you're truly living in the public eye, and some people are, but for the rest of us, I think the risk is actually on the lowish side. I'm not saying there isn't the potential to be within whatever circles we run in to feel shamed, and that shame is really debilitating. It certainly is. But I suspect the opportunity for growth, that if someone's calling you out and that's an opportunity to be like, oh, I didn't notice that before. What goodish people do is when people help us see things that we didn't see before, we examine it, we look at it, we thank them for it. We do what my friend did when he said, pull up a chair. That in that moment, the opportunity for growth is actually so great and should be so tempting to us in that moment that it should minimize the risk of the call out we're feeling in that moment. As professors, I feel like I get called out a lot. Like, I use words that I didn't know were problematic in class. I didn't know you weren't supposed to say that. I get the email, I get the hand, I don't love it at all. I have such a long list of moments where I felt called out by my students, but I will say that I'm better now for every one of those moments.
Great. So I want to move to some of these wonderful questions that we have coming in. And a couple of questions that relate to the same topic that I want to ask are, and I can provide a little bit of context to this after I ask the question. So one is, how can individuals push back against lopsided systems like forced arbitration that have proven unjust and disparate effects within organizations such as law firms?
Yeah.
And related to that, similar question, how do you think the systems for adjudication of legal claims companies use, such as DLA Piper and other firms' use of forced arbitration, interact with implicit bias and your theory of bounded ethicality? Bounded ethicality being the goodish people concept, is that
right? It's what I call the psychology of good people.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So this, these questions relate to an issue that, in all candor, I kind of expected to come up at this discussion, because we had at the center conversations with some students around the issue of forced arbitration prior to this event. And particularly, DLA Piper is called out specifically here, and their practices of mandatory arbitration. So I do want to, you can respond on the topic of mandatory arbitration specifically if you wish, but I think the question more broadly also implicates, what do we do about being allies, fighting bias when there are more systemic, kind of baked-in problems in institutions that make it hard for us to fight
Yeah,
bias.
absolutely. Thank you for the multiple people who asked that question. I think part of it is already happening based on the question, which is the noticing where the problem with things that are baked in is you don't see them. They're baked in. And just getting to the point of noticing it yourself and then communicating to others what we've accepted, what we hadn't even noticed. Like upon examination, it's probably clear that there's something problematic there, but that is probably not something, because it was so normalized for so long that we weren't necessarily seeing as problematic. We were in the same way that you can open the fridge and swear that there's no milk, and why didn't anybody put milk on the list, and then have whoever you live with say, milk's right there. It's right in front of you. In the same way that you cannot see something that's right in front of you, the noticing piece is a really big part of this work. I think it's, in fact, the biggest part of the work is the noticing. The things that we thought were normal. It's like when you watch old episodes of a TV show you used to watch when you were younger, and you look at it now and you're like, I thought that was an okay word to say, and it didn't bother me, or I thought it was okay that people interacted that way. Like, I'm a West Wing fan. I love the show The West Wing. Obsessed with this show. It was originally on, back 20-ish years ago. And I still love the show, but when I watch it now, I'm sort of appalled at some of the things I noticed that didn't even faze me back then. And so I would say in changing organizations, the noticing is sometimes the hardest part of the work, is getting yourself to notice and then getting more and more and more and more people to notice, which is tiresome work and requires tireless effort.
And so another question relates to how can I signal that I am an ally to other associates in my law firm, or really any organization, right? Assuming we're not all going around with our ally badge on, what are some ways to kind of out ourselves to other people that we might be a potential ally?
Yeah. Well, first is examine why we want to do that, right? So are we doing that because we want to feel like a good person? Because sometimes that's a real need in that moment. And I would say if that's what's feeling like the driving force, we need to check that impulse. We actually don't want to go signal that we're an ally, because what we're doing there is taking care of our own good person needs in that moment, and we should go take care of them, but not by imposing that emotional labor on others. On the other hand, sometimes what we're trying to signal is that we are ready to act, we are ready to take risks or to be available in a meaningful way. And I think that can be done in a variety of ways. It can be done by, I noticed you said something the other day in the meeting and it didn't get much traction. I'd like to see if I can help. Do you mind talking? Or it could be, I noticed some stuff on the news last night about X. How are you holding up? And then allowing whatever the response to be the response. If the person's like, I'm good, step away. No, really, are you? Or if it's creating a space for someone to share and discuss something that's typically silenced in the organization and not made visible. So I think getting in touch with what the intention is really important. My sense is people, when you're in touch with this intention, it rises to the surface. But the problem is, so often this is the intention that's bubbling. I feel it, I know, on a pretty ongoing basis.
Another question, why do you think there are so few men at this lecture?
Sorry, I just knocked your cup over to look at, are there so few men?
I feel like there are some men, but Anyway, why do you think? Although this is a question I must say I hear a lot in work on diversity and inclusion, is people do come to me and say, I get so frustrated because I run initiatives relating to women's leadership or gender equity, and only the women show up. Or I run programs relating to racial inclusion and racial justice, and You know what I mean? Like there's situations where like only members of the affected groups
Yeah, absolutely.
will go, and why? Like, what's the barrier there? I think that's preventing
Yeah.
people from wanting to participate.
Well, part of it is that we are most in touch with what we're experiencing. So if you're experiencing what Debbie Irving, author Debbie Irving describes as headwinds versus tailwinds, if you're experiencing the headwinds on a particular issue, you feel it. If you're experiencing the tailwinds, like something that's going in your favor, you don't feel it. Like if you're riding your bike and you have a tailwind, you don't realize you have a tailwind until you turn around, and then it's like, whoa, it's windy today, and you feel that headwind. So I think in these kinds of forums, we tend to see the people who are facing the headwinds more than the tailwinds.
Right.
But I think there's also, like, I'm noticing a real increase in people getting invested in issues that don't affect them directly. I've seen a real change even over the last year or two, and certainly over the last several years. And so part of it is people don't realize the impact they can have. So studies show that if you're from an impacted group, let's just take the example, somebody tells a racist joke, and a black person says, that was a racist joke. They will be taken less seriously, according to research. They will be dismissed more. They will be viewed as whiny more than if a white person said the exact same thing in the exact same situation about the exact same joke. Now, that's not fair, but that is what the research shows. So what that says, though, is we have an opportunity when we're not the one directly facing the headwind on an issue. We have an opportunity to have impact, not by talking over or centering ourselves over or replacing the perspective of the person facing the headwind, but by not being silent. So sometimes we might think, well, I'm not directly affected, I shouldn't be involved, I shouldn't go to the thing. We feel like we don't have permission, when in fact I would argue if you can remain a partner, not speak over, you actually have a real role to play.
Great. So this question, I think gets at something really profound, which is how do I handle human nature around the pie being only so big? How do I avoid being biased when doing so might mean losing some of my status or privilege? I appreciate that this question has been posed with this candor, because I think it actually does speak to something powerful that people in more powerful groups in society really feel when there's change on these issues, that they're losing something. And so how do we tackle that feeling?
Right. Well, I guess in certain situations it's true. I mean, not all. It's probably not as true as we think it is. I teach negotiations. I'm not teaching it this year, but I have in the past over at the business school. And one of the things we talk about is the fixed pie bias, that in negotiations, studies show that we grossly overestimate how many negotiations are truly fixed pie, win-lose negotiations, and we grossly underestimate the number of opportunities we had to grow the pie. We also grossly overestimate the number of people we're negotiating with or against who are in a fixed pie mindset.
Right.
So we're seeing the world through a fixed pie lens in a way that is constraining us. So it's probably true that there are those situations. It's probably not true that there are as many as we think. It's a true story. This happened this weekend. I was being mocked by my children. I say that mocking me is their love language. And I was being mocked by my children, and I responded, I am so underappreciated. And my 13-year-old daughter instantly came back with, Mom, I think you are underappreciated. I agree. You're just not as underappreciated as you think you are. I think it's a little bit true for the fixed pie bias as well.
So a couple of questions relating to the 20-60-20 rule. So one is, do you think that idea is true of other societies and cultures outside of the US, or is that a US specific? And then another person just challenges the percentages, says, is it more like 45, 10, 45, and gives the example of the 2016 election and how kind of strong and fixed people's views seem to be on kind of both of the further ends and how that middle pie of this that you're describing as the 60 might
Yeah.
actually be smaller.
Yeah, got it. Sorry, what was the first one again?
The first one was about, does it apply in other cultures?
Oh, other cultures. Thank you. Right. So I should be clear. The 20-60-20 rule came from a consultant, not a researcher. So that's not like empirical, but it jives with what I know from the research. The numbers are completely made up. And so, yeah, maybe it is 45, 10, 45. I don't know. The point is that there are 3 groups, and on any given issue, it probably varies widely. So it's less about the numbers, and it's more about you're spending too much time here. Sorry. You've just now been stereotyped. Cross-culturally, I assume norms vary dramatically culture to culture. We know norms vary dramatically. We know there's what Michelle Gelfand, psychologist, calls tight versus loose cultures. And so absolutely there would be variation in terms of what is persuasive and what is expected and what behaviors show up in the 20 versus the 60 versus the 20. But I think in terms of human psychology on any given topic, there's going to be variation and sort of level of investment and point of view would be universal across culture. Regarding the connection to the political climate, I realize voting behavior may be 45, 10, 45, but I don't think that's quite what we're talking about here. Like within, let's say, the 45 that might be voting Democrat, there is still on the issues of equity and whether we live in a meritocracy and whether racial bias is a thing, there is still great variation within that 45. And so I don't think who you vote for maps perfectly onto what we're talking about here.
Great. Someone's asked what your view is on employee resource groups within organizations. So groups dedicated to particular groups, the LGBT group, the women's group, et cetera. Are they just people within the group complaining to each other, or do they create change? And do they need allies to create change?
So I'm in favor of the groups. I think they probably vary widely in their effectiveness, just like everything. It's like saying, are books good? Some are, some aren't. You know, like it depends. It sort of depends what's in it. I think allies are really powerful and important, and the research would support that as well. Affinity groups are definitely the people complaining to each other. I don't think is where the power is. It's people feeling seen, particularly if you're in an organization where you're in a minority. It's creating an opportunity to reduce what's called stereotype threat, the feeling that you're always being judged and evaluated. Whether you are or aren't, that is how you feel. And we know that actually diminishes performance. It's creating a place where you feel seen, creating a place where your norms, your culture, your background, your experiences, whatever it is this group has in common, can be shared and celebrated. These are all good things. It's also powerful networking. It's exactly what you want to happen in an organization. You want people getting to know people outside of their silos. What a great way to do it. And if there's opportunities to also affect change, even better.
Great. So someone's asked, right and wrong behaviors on these issues are defined differently by different people. And how do you reconcile those differing views when you're trying to educate others? For example, when 2 women are interacting with a man and one finds his comments sexist and the other does not.
Right, yeah. And that happens all the time, right? That we have a range of opinions. That's why it's really dangerous to just ask your one female friend what she thinks of something, because she can't speak on behalf of her gender, and she can't speak on behalf of all genders, and she can't speak on behalf of a gender binary. I mean, there's just a million ways in which that's problematic. I guess I struggle with this a lot because it's like I've been trying to decide whether I should be like including my pronouns in all my email signatures and in my slides in class, in my survey, when I send out a background survey to students, should I ask them for their pronouns? And I've gotten differing views on that. I've gotten the view that, yes, I should, it's important, and I've gotten the view of some people feel some people haven't, they're in the process still of exploring their gender identity, and this is sort of forcing them to take a public stand to someone in a high power position as a professor. And I've heard the view that, like, why are we talking about pronouns? And so, but I think these two views are the ones that are more relevant here. And I feel really torn about it. So I think it's an invitation that when that's happening, that there's more to learn. It's the nudge that there is a richer issue here. It's more layered. And eventually I'll have to form my own view on it, but I need to have multiple perspectives, is I think what that tells me.
Great. So we're reaching the end of time. So I do want, not the end of all time, the end of the time for this event, hopefully. I do want to wrap up with just one final question. Someone's asked, what advice do you have about starting to expose yourself to new social circles and new content? You know, where do you start? What strategies can you recommend? So I guess, are there, aside from your wonderful book, are there other, texts that you would recommend, videos, articles to read, or what should people be doing once they leave the room tonight?
Sure. I'm going to suggest, there's certainly lots of books and texts, and if you haven't read Covering by Kenji Yoshino, you should. It's fantastic. But I actually think social media is a real asset to us here. Google, whatever community you would like to be more familiar with, Google, let's say on Twitter, Twitter hashtags, LGBTQ. And a list of hashtags will come up. And then search for those hashtags and start following them regularly. You're eavesdropping on conversations. Now, it's really important you eavesdrop and not interject yourself, and not defend, and not argue, and not talk over, and not interrupt. But just eavesdrop in a public forum what people within the community, what do they talk about, what do they care about, what are they thinking about, what are they wrestling with, what are they arguing about. I've found it to be an incredible resource to privately educate myself on things that are not showing up in my daily conversations with people, but that I'd like to be more informed about. And then from there, you can certainly books and podcasts, and it's all there.
Wonderful. So I want to remind everyone who was seeking CLE credit to please make sure you sign out when out the doors. And I hope that you can stick around for the reception and continue the conversation after this. But can you please join me in thanking Professor Chugh for joining us?
Thank you for having me.